We are live! Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn. To the thousands watching live on Zoom and the millions watching on YouTube, it is wonderful to see you all here today. We do really have a great crowd on Zoom, so do jump on if you can on the Bushy Shul Zoom channel. We are here, we are waiting, we are live, and we are going to start, as we always do, with some words about the parsha, but really we're going to start, as I always forget, we're going to mention it early this time. The learning that we are doing is in dedication and in memory of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. So for the Aliyah of the Neshama of Harav Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh. That's who we are dedicating our learning to, and it should be also as a zechut for a refuah shalema to all those in the community and beyond who are sick or unwell or otherwise indisposed. We have everybody in our hearts, and we hope that it can be a source of merit and a source of speedy recovery to them all. Okay, so a little bit about this week's parasha. Parashat Toldot. Why is it called Parashat Toldot? What does Toldot mean? Toldot means the offspring, the generations, the repercussions of different things, the derivatives of something at the source. And it's interesting because this week's parasha starts off Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham. These are the Toldot, the derivatives, the offspring, the offshoots of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. And if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, we had Parashat Noach, and over there we said Eile Toldot Noach. These are the offspring of Noach. Well, isn't it interesting that we had the same words a couple of weeks ago, Eile Toldot Noach, and yet the parasha is called Noach. And this week we have Eile Toldot Yitzchak, and it's not called Parashat Yitzchak, it's called Parashat Toldot. So one of the beautiful reasons for this is because Yitzchak embodied the channeling of providing for the future and providing for the next generation. His whole essence, everything that he got involved in, was about channeling Abraham's message and feeding it on to the next generation. So the parsha encapsulates in the name this concept of Toldot, because the Toldot of Yitzchak were the offspring. He was all about everything that came from him. It was all about investing in Yaakov and Esav. It was all about investing in taking the good things of Avraham and filtering them down further and progressing further. So that is one of the reasons why this week's parasha is called Toldot and not called Yitzchak, because the message that we want to have from Yitzchak is that he, and in fact there's so much about this week's parasha that is all about the providing for the future, the provision of what comes next. So a couple of things that we mentioned in this week's parasha. We talk about Rivka's being barrenness. She was not a baroness, but she was barren. So we learn about Yitzchak and Rivka praying to be able to have a child or to have children. And in fact, we have the birth of twins, Yaakov and Esav. Esav comes out first. Yaakov comes out second, holding on to Esav's heel. And we see how the difference between them was already apparent when Rivka was pregnant. We might be familiar with the concept that whenever Rivka would walk past a shul or would walk past a place of holiness, then Yaakov, or she would feel the baby kicking, and similarly when she went past places of impurity, she would feel the baby kicking, and it was only after consulting with an expert that she discovered that she was pregnant with twins. It bothered her greatly that she thought that having only one child inside of her, that the child was either was going to be a complete hodgepodge, because it was trying to make a fuss when she was going past holy places, and it was going crazy as well inside of her when she was going past impure places. So she thought like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I've got to deal with this child over here. It's going to be so conflicted. And that's the point at which she learns that she is actually pregnant with twins. And Yaakov is going to be the one who is going to take the mantle forward and lead a life of holiness. And Esav is going to be the one that is a bit of a thorn in her side, or in their side. So we have the famous episode of Esav giving up his birthright in exchange for a bowl of soup or a bowl of lentil stew or whatever it might be. We also have the episode of Yitzchak now facing a famine, and Yitzchak going to Avimelech like his father did. Was it last week or the week before? We have the famous dispute over uncovering wells that had been dug up by Abraham and had been covered over, and he now has to go and redig the wells. That comes up in this week's parasha, and there as well, without going into too much detail, that's also symbolic of Yitzchak wanting to rechannel and continue the legacy of Abraham. It's all ties in with that as well. And we have the story of Yaakov tricking his father to be able to get the blessing from Yitzchak, and Esav coming back and finding out that he's been tricked, and that sets up the animosity between Esav and Yaakov that forces Yaakov to have to run away. And that's how the parsha ends off, with Yaakov having to run away to stay with his uncle Lavan, because Esav is now infuriated that he has lost out on the bracha, on the blessing from Yitzchak. There's other things as well, but that's all we'll do for today. And for now, let's dive back into the world of Pirkei Avot. I don't know where we were up to the last time David was on, but it's certainly a pleasure to have you back. I've missed you considerably.
Dan asked me to apologise. He's turned up and with lunch, and she's only there for an hour, so.
So she doesn't want to come learn. Okay, I understand.
Well, he said he wouldn't bother, he'd love to, but his daughter can only come once a week.
He's opted for the lunch rather than the learn. You've all opted for the learn rather than the lunch.
He's opted to give bracha to his daughter, I think.
Lovely, absolutely. And I was actually just talking to somebody who's making a bris tomorrow, and they're having to be the father and the son deck all rolled into one. So he said, what should I do? So I said, just make sure that you channel all of your good wishes and all of your blessings at the time of the bris, and everything that you want for the child, just make sure to focus on that and channel it all in. So yeah, we should always give our children brachot, shouldn't we, Dad? Okay, so chapter 3, Mishnah 21. Let's get it up on the screen, and we'll crack on. Where is it? We're really getting close, guys, by the way, to the end of chapter 3. It's in our reach. It's in our reach. It's very exciting. Okay, so it's a long Mishnah, but we're only going to go up to we're going to do 4 lines today in this one, because in my book it's broken up differently. I'm not sure what page we're on, if we're inside the green siddur. Josephine, are you using a green siddur? I'll take that as a no. Okay, so we're either on 21 or we're on 17, whatever it might be. Says the Mishnah.
Can I just ask, it sounds amazing to me, because I've got a number of books on Pirkei Avot, and they're all identical, the chapters. When we look at the Mishnah or the Gemara, it's identical in every seat. You mention the number, you know you're there. Even in Hilchos Baruch, any of them.
Yeah.
But I've never, why is it some books have different numbers? Have they split some of the parshas up?
Martin, this is such a deep question. I don't feel like you are ready to have that. I don't feel like you're ready to have that wisdom shared with you, Martin. No, the truth is, I have absolutely no idea. Absolutely no idea. It boggles my mind just as much as it does yours. I have absolutely no insight.
Every other book we look at, once you give the chapter and the verse, we know exactly where we are. But
Absolutely.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
I don't know. Although you do see times. No, you ask a good question. I just wish I had an answer for you. I simply don't. You do see with the way the Mishnah gets broken up in the Gemara, you do see occasions where they are at variance. And sometimes if you're reading from a book of Mishnah, it could give you a very long piece. And when you see it in the Gemara, it's divided it up. And vice versa. Sometimes you can have something which is one or two sentences in the Mishnah, but in the Gemara they've combined a couple of them together. I don't have an answer, unfortunately. I'm sorry. You have to ask a real rabbi. So anybody want to read for us on the screen the first 4 lines there up until... Oh, no, it's not first 4 lines in here. We're going to go up until the mouse. There you go.
The mouse, right. Rabbi Elazar, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. And see you.
Oh, no. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, where there is no Torah, there is no right conduct. Where there is no right conduct, there is no Torah. Where there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. Where there is no fear of God, there is no wisdom. Where there is no understanding, there is no knowledge. Where there is no knowledge, there is no understanding. Where there is no bread, there is no Torah. Where there is no Torah, there is no bread.
Beautiful. So we have got a lot of balancing that we're looking at today. It would seem that all these different things are components that without one, you don't really have true balance, and without the other, you also don't really have true balance. It pays for us to see it in the Hebrew as well. Imein Torah ein derech eretz. So it translates it on the screen here as right conduct. So we'll give some thought as to what derech eretz is. We've talked about it in the past. But if there is no Torah, then there is no derech eretz. But if there is no derech eretz, there's also no Torah. Im ein chachma ein yira. If there is no chachma, no wisdom, ein yira, there is no fear. Well, we're presumably talking about fear of God, but we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Im ein yira ein chachma. But if you don't have yira, then your chachma's no good or no use, or who knows what it means. Let's see what people think. Im ein bina ein das. If there's no bina, then there's no das. Well, we have to understand what that is. If there's no understanding, there is no knowledge. If there is no knowledge, there is no understanding. Imein kemach ein Torah. Interesting that it translates it as bread, because kemach doesn't mean bread. Anyone know what kemach means, translated into English?
Well, food, sustenance.
So the word literally means flour.
Oh.
If you go into a shop and ask kemach, they will bring you a flour. They'll bring you a bag of flour. And in fact, I was once on holiday with my family as a kid, and we went to a restaurant in Netanya, and I asked for kemach with my drink, and the waitress laughed. I said, "Why are you laughing?" They said, "I think you mean kerach, which is ice." So I asked for flour with my drink instead of ice. Anyway, imein kemach ein Torah. If you don't have flour, you don't have Torah. Imein Torah ein kemach. If you don't have Torah, then you don't have flour, you don't have bread. So it's interesting because we've got Imein Torah ein derech eretz, we've got Imein Torah ein kemach. So a lot to think about on this one. Let's see, have any of you got anything you want to say?
Rabbi, can you go back onto the Hebrew, because I need to ask a question on the Hebrew. Derech eretz, I thought was respect.
Ah, very good. And over here, it translates it as right conduct. So it's all built into the essence of what derech eretz is.
It's the same thing, isn't it?
I can see Jeffrey nodding his head over there.
That's what I thought it was derech eretz. I thought it was respect, but I wasn't sure because you said right conduct.
It's how we utilize the term, don't we? So there's layers of depth there. Joe, you are welcome to speak, but you are muted.
I just wanted to ask, what is the actual translation of derech?
Derech is a path. Eretz is the ground.
It's a path.
So
You said
path of the
path?
ground, but Derech Eretz is a concept which we translate either as worldliness or as respect, proper conduct,
That's what I thought it was.
an ethical basis. Pardon me, Martin?
Haaretz, we also, as having no knowledge, but the actual translation is not a person of the ground. I don't know where we get it from, but we don't mean that. Does it mean that all farmers were silly? I don't know. But we now mean is somebody who hasn't had the benefit of knowledge.
That's right. That's right. Is a nation, not a person. So
the nation of the ground. I mean, it used to be not a nice term at all. But I think
so much so that you've already used it before we started.
Say that the people who are Haaretz are unfortunate that nobody taught them.
Yeah.
It's not their fault. It's somebody else's fault.
Yeah. That's right. So let's start off perhaps by pointing out that the things that we're exploring over here, it ties into themes that we've talked about in the past. Pirkei Avot, on so many occasions, has been about understanding the necessity for balance and the necessity for moderation and taking the good things from two extremes and navigating our way between them, and that's very much what we're looking at here. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying that if we only invest in one area of each of these examples, you end up losing out on the other end of the scale, and you may end up with nothing. So this is all about reaching the balance. The other kind of preface that I will give to this is that in order to be able to internalize something, to own something, to have it as a part of your life, you need to be a fitting receptacle. What do I mean? If you want a drink of water, it's no good just running the tap and expecting to be able to drink it, because there's so much going to waste trying to shove your hand under the sink, under the tap. You need a receptacle. If you have a receptacle, if you have a cup, you can put that cup under the stream of water, and then you can collect something that you can then utilize. So in a similar vein, as people, we have to be receptacles for different values. We have to put ourselves in a particular frame of mind. We have to put ourselves into particular environments. We have to put ourselves at particular stages of our life. And in so doing, we can then receive, and we can then internalize, and we can then absorb what it is that we are talking about. So let's have a look. Unless people have got more comments. Oh, hello, Daphne. Lovely to see you.
That's me.
Yeah, we've got both Zemmels. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. A warm, bushy welcome to the Zemmels. There we go. So let's have a look. Lovely to see you. So,
Rabbi, I've got a question.
oh, good. Yes.
Was the Rabbi Elazar one of the 5 rabbis we talked about?
No, I don't believe that he was, but he was a super guy. You will recognize Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah because he has been at your Seder table every single year.
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry, he's one of those 5 rabbis, actually. Yeah, the ones that sit in Bnei Barak at the beginning of the Seder. Of Rabbi Eliezer, a story is told. Of Rabbi Yehoshua, that scholar of old, Elazar ben Azariah, Akiva the sage, and Tarfon for wisdom, renowned in his age. And B'nai Barak, they at Seder dined well, and the whole long night the old tale they retell, how God in his power humbled Egypt's great might and brought out our children from darkness to light. Yes, Elazar ben Azariah.
Children's Haggadah that we've got.
Yes.
That everybody's got. My daughter says that poem every Seder night. She recites that beautifully.
Oh. Was it as good as mine or better?
Hers is wonderful.
I mean, I learnt it as a tune, but I spared you that.
That's why I thought I recognised the name.
Yes, no, he's a big face. Is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and one of the things we go on to talk about is we quote him in the Haggadah when he says that I am like a man of 70 years old. He was not a man of 70 years old when he said that. He was a man of 17 years old. But at a time when Rabban Gamliel was removed from his position in high office, the sages appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah as his replacement. And he was just a wee little nipper. He was only 17 at the time. And he felt like, how can I, even though he was this amazing giant of a mind, he was only 17, and he felt like, how could I possibly ever step into the void that Rabban Gamliel leaves? And miraculously overnight, we're taught that his beard turned from dark to grey. And so that was why he was like a man at 70 years old, because overnight he turned into a man who looked far older than he actually was. So he was an immense mind, an immense Torah leader, and he's an all-round great guy. So says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Im ein Torah, ein derech eretz. Okay, so derech eretz we can encompass as the midah, as it were, or several midot, several character traits that make you worldly, that make you a developed moral character, that make you a mensch, basically. So that's one of the understandings of what derech eretz is. We actually have a phrase, derech eretz kadma l'Torah, that before starting to embark on a journey of trying to understand the word of God and trying to understand Torah, you have to have certain prerequisites in place. You have to have a certain ethical foundation, a certain ethical basis, which then the Torah can be poured into. So what we were saying about being a fitting receptacle, to be able to absorb that which the Torah has to offer, you have to be a kli, you have to be a vessel of being a mensch, so that the Torah has somewhere to go. But vice versa as well. If you want derech eretz, if you want to be able to be a good person, if you want to be an ethical person, someone who is balanced, someone who can contribute, someone who is honest in business, whatever it might be. So the Mishnah is telling us you have to have Torah as well. They work together, they work in tandem, and we have to try and absorb as much of that as possible. If you have Torah, but you don't have derech eretz, if you don't put anything into practice, if you don't practice what you preach, then what good is the Torah? But if you are expecting to just kind of navigate life quite blindly and just assume that you'll pick it up along the way, then you are subject to the whims and the fancies of whatever society deems as being moral and justified. So we're being taught that there's an absolute framework to work within, which is the Torah, which is what Hashem expects of us. And once you've got the absolute framework to work within, then you can pour that derech eretz in as well. And it means that you will have a consistent ethical basis, and it won't be subject to the whims and fancies of whatever society may throw. Because otherwise, it can change in every single generation. If we look back through history and we see some of the different things which we would consider abhorrent now, but once upon a time they were so widely accepted, and vice versa, things which once upon a time were so abhorrent but which nowadays are socially accepted. So the only way to avoid that is to have an absolute yardstick, something that never changes, something that allows you to remain consistent morally. So on the one hand, if you have just Torah but you're not a mensch, then that's useless. It takes both. But on the other hand, if Torah is just no, I think we're still on the same hand here. If Torah is just an intellectual pursuit, but you're a nasty guy, that doesn't work. It has to result in proper conduct. But if you are just trying to be a nice guy and there's nothing there that's regulating your behavior, and there's nothing there that's holding you to a consistent standard, then there's no telling which way you could end up going in the name of Derech Eretz. There have been people who have committed horrendous crimes, even in recent history, which was all about being a mensch, the Ubermensch, being the role model and the image to which everything has to conform. And without an ethical framework like the Torah, we saw just where that led. Having a superior race without any kind of ethics resulted in genocide. So that's why it has to be receptacles that balance each other and that work in tandem with each other. So that's the first one. Any comments before we move on? All right. Im ein yira, is that where we're up to now? Let's turn the page. Im ein chochma, ein yira. Im ein yira, ein chochma. If there is no wisdom, there is no fear of God. So let's try and think. Are there, do we see this as being two sides of the scale, wisdom and yira? And pardon me? Yeah? Say again?
Understanding is opposite, isn't it? You have to understand.
Well, that's interesting. It's not what it says, is it? That's interesting, because is wisdom the same as understanding? Is wisdom different to understanding? There's actually three words. There's actually three words that we see in this Mishnah that are related to things that we hold in our head. There's chachma, there's bina, and there's das. There's chachma, bina, and das. Maybe it will pay for us to understand what those three things are. So chachma we translate on the screen as wisdom. Bina we translate on the screen as understanding. And das we translate on the screen as knowledge. By the way, can you notice an acronym for those three words? Chachma, bina, and das. You got a chet, you got a bet, and you got a dalet, and that spells Chabad.
Is that where it comes from?
I think it is definitely all linked together. It's the acronym of Chabad. Before it referred to Chabad, it referred to Chachma, Bina, and Das. These are three levels that we talk about in Jewish thought and in Jewish mysticism, and pardon me?
Well, I said I've just got a thing here.
Oh, there you go. So Josephine is sharing on her screen over there a diagram of the Kabbalistic Sfirot. Quite how to talk about that, I have very little ability to do so. But there are 10 Sfirot, there are 10, so to speak, dimensions that we talk about. We talk about Chesed, loving kindness. We talk about Gevura, which is restraint. We talk about Yesod, which is foundation. Okay, so there's 10 in total, and the top three are known as Chabad: Chachma, Bina, and Das. So Chachma we understand as being essentially information. We hear things, we absorb things, we see the world around us, we take things in. Chachma in Jewish thought is information. Bina is the next level up. Bina is where we start to digest that information. We start to take things and we compare them, we contrast them, we start to build a structure in our mind. We process, we analyze, we digest, we compute the information, we try and understand it, we try and grapple with it, we think deeper. So Chachma is quite superficial. It's the wave of information that comes to our senses through the world. It's the things we see, it's the things we touch, it's the things we sense, it's the things we feel, it's the things we hear, etc. Bina is when we start to digest it, and Das is the point at which those two things become one entity. They become a part of who we are. It's a thought, it's information that we have now digested and we have made it a part of us. Things that we will remember forevermore. Things that form a part of our psyche, part of our identity. That is when you have taken Chachma, you have binarized it, and now it's part of your das. It's the things that you know, it's the things that you can comprehend, it's the things that you can make sense of, it's the things that you can share with other people. So,
but the one, sorry to interrupt you, but the one here, the wisdom,
yeah,
is just the first one. It's not the three together.
Correct.
The wisdom in this Mishnah.
Correct. So based on that understanding, perhaps we can look at these things in the following way. Im ein chokhmah, ein yira. If we are just about accumulating wisdom, accumulating information, but there's no, again, the yira over here, the fear of God, the appreciation that we have to restrain ourselves from what we do with our information. So if we just have our thoughts, if we just have the things that we think are emes, the things that we think are truth, the things that we think are right, so it can lead to distortion, it can lead to fanaticism, because there's nothing above us that's tugging in the other direction. But on the other hand, if all you have is just fear of God, then you are going to lose out on having the creativity, on the curiosity, on the innovation, which can come about from having Chachma, or for having an appreciation for Chachma. So they sit on two sides. In order to fully engage with the world, the things that we absorb, the things that we hear, it has to fit into a framework of knowing that there's something above us. That's the yira. That's where we are cautious about what we do, because we understand that there's something in place above us that needs to hold us to a standard. But if we didn't have any wisdom, if all we had was just adherence to a structure and not setting a foot wrong and being scared to ever explore anything, then you end up with a diminished intellect. You end up with an uncreative life. So it takes both.
The only drawback with this is that you don't just have wisdom, do you? It develops. You get wisdom from learning, from experience, and all sorts of things.
All of this is developed. The whole Mishnah is an appreciation that these things have to grow, and these things have to move. As I said, we have to shape ourselves into the appropriate vessels to be able to absorb everything, and that doesn't happen overnight. So much of what we say doesn't happen overnight. You know, one of the things I was going to say before, we talk about derech eretz, right? Im ein Torah, ein derech eretz. If there's no Torah, there's no derech eretz. What is derech eretz? How do I know how to be a mensch? How do I know? So it's interesting. There is a masechet, there is a part of the oral law called derech eretz zuta. It didn't make it into the full canon of the Mishnayot, but it's within the same kind of framework as the Mishnayot. And if you go through Masechet Derech Eretz, you will see there are so many comparisons and so many similarities between the messages and the lessons in Masechet Derech Eretz as there are in Pirkei Avot. And maybe that's why it never really made it into the official canon, because we've got Pirkei Avot. So if you want to know how to have Derech Eretz, if you want to know how to be a mensch, then we read this book, and we learn what it means to be worldly and to be a person on a journey of reaching balance and reaching a good ethical standing point. So back to over here.
Isn't there a Mishnah? I don't know whether we've done it or it's in the future in one of the other chapters. Ezehu Chochma, who is wise, one who learns from everybody.
That's right. Spoiler alert, that comes up in a few weeks' time. But yes. So that's Yira on the level of fear of God. That if we don't have anything that's going to hold us to a standard that we're afraid of, then there's no telling where your wisdom can end up taking you, where your chachma can end up taking you. Yira doesn't just mean that though. Yira can also mean an awe of God and an awe of the world. If we are in awe of the world, then we can translate that. We can absorb everything that we see around us and turn that into something good. But if you don't have any awe of the world around you, then where are you supposed to put the chachma? Where are you supposed to put the signals and everything that you're interpreting from and the cues that you're interpreting from the world around you? It takes both of those dimensions as well. We have to appreciate the significance of what we have around us so that we can then value the messages that it's sending us. So that's Ein Yira and Ein Chochma. Next we have Im Ein Das, Ein Bina. And if Im Ein Bina, Ein Das. So two sides of the coin over here. If we don't have knowledge, if we don't have anything that we have internalized, anything that we have really digested and become one with, then we don't have any bina either. We clearly don't have this ability to digest and to think and to compute and to analyze. But if we don't have any ability to compute and analyze and process, then we also won't have any das. So it takes both of these things. We have to be thinking people. We have to inquire. We have to ask. We have to analyze. We have to expand the boundaries of our knowledge to make ourselves better people, more developed people, more worldly people, wiser people. So it's not enough just to kind of have information. You have to have somewhere for it to go and to digest and to analyze and for it to all click into place. We have to have a system that helps us to look at the world so that we can then function in the world. Otherwise, everything's coming at us and we've got nowhere to put it. We have no receptacle, no vessel in which to store it. I remember when I read Sherlock Holmes, that was like a world opener for me, because Conan Doyle always used to talk about how compartmentalized Sherlock's mind was, and if there was useless information, he literally just did not retain the information. But things which are of value, things which you digest, things which you reflect and think about, they become a part of who you are. They become a part of your identity. So it takes multiple components to bring that all together. And it's not something that happens instantly. It's something that we develop over our lifetimes. Do we want to move on to the last one, or have anyone got questions or comments? Okay. Oh. So the last one, Im Ein Kemach, Ein Torah. Im Ein Torah, Ein Kemach. So this is playing at the fundamental needs of the fundamental things that we need as human beings. We need physical nourishment, but we also need spiritual nourishment as well. And what's amazing is that this seems to strike right at the core of who we are. We need to nourish both our physical side as well as our spiritual side. If you don't have food, main kemach, if you don't have anything to eat, then you're not going to be able to learn Torah either. You're not going to be able to engage with your spiritual side, because you're just going to be so overwhelmed with the struggles of not being able to eat. Right? When I you can ask Shira this. When I don't eat, I get hangry. Right? Anyone else get hangry? Right? I'm just a very difficult person to be around. There we go. We've got a lot of finger pointing going on. But when you are low on physical resources, it makes it so hard to concentrate, to focus, to behave, to speak nicely to people. So all of that gets impacted, and I think that's being emphasized here. If there's no flour, if a person literally is not taking care of their physical needs, their spiritual needs will suffer as well. But if life is all about the kemach, if life is all about the food, it's all about the physical enjoyment, then you're not nourishing your soul either, which isn't good. And it's interesting, I read a book called Lost Connections. I'd love to get him to speak one time. It's by a guy called Johann Hari. He's not a Jewish fella, to the best of my knowledge, but he wrote this book on 9 causes to depression, or nine reasons, 9 very fundamental reasons why people can lead a life of depression. And what he establishes is that when you have an imbalance with feeding your one second, I think I'm echoing on your computer, Rita, so I'm just gonna mute you there, and if you do need to, now I'm echoing on yours. Anyway, so when there is an imbalance between the way that we are nourishing our bodies, nourishing our minds, nourishing ourselves in a meaningful physical way, and there's an imbalance in the way that we are nourishing ourselves spiritually. So if there's an imbalance, it can lead to feelings of depression, feelings of incompleteness, feelings of unsettledness, of anxiety. These things can all be generated because we're just not hitting the right balance for what our souls and our bodies actually need. So life is about this ongoing journey of balancing the kemach and the Torah, feeding our physical side and feeding our spiritual side, feeding our emotional side. It all has to be nourished. Otherwise, we end up being completely out of balance, out of keel, off kilter, and that can have really, really negative ramifications for the way that we lead our lives. So there we go. That's all I wanted to say on this Mishnah. So we can pause for questions and pause for comments. So I'll open the floor then.
It's obvious to us, obviously, that if a person is destitute and fighting for sustenance, then obviously they haven't. The time of the inclination and depression comes. What always amazes me is how many the children of exceedingly wealthy and successful people who have everything, every opportunity, become depressed and go on the wrong path when they could be doing so much good and so much. They have such advantage, and yet you see it all the time. It absolutely astounds me.
So that, I would say,
wealth, too much of something causes particularly the children of wealthy people not to live a proper life.
So that, I would say, is the perfect example of what we're talking about. We can understand if a person has nothing, then they literally don't have the time to focus on the spiritual side. But even when you have everything, if you're not also balancing that with some kind of meaning, some kind of spiritual and emotional meaning, then even if you have all of the physical needs taken care of, you still you still require that balance, 100%. Rita, 1 second, I muted you before, so let's get you back on again. There you go.
Can you hear me? In all these 4 or 5 paragraphs, there's no word, there's not single word of work except learning Torah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that might just be my poor explanation, but kemach. So one of the layers of understanding for kemach also refers to work. It doesn't mean just food, but it means the ability to provide food as well. So I apologize, Rita. You're 100% right.
No, I just wondered, probably in this, if there is no bread, there is no Torah.
So one of the layers of implication of kemach, of bread, of flour, whatever it is work. Yes, is the provision of physical self, which comes through engagement with the working world. Yes.
And that would apply to right conduct as well.
Correct.
Behaving right in business, in your work ethic.
Correct.
It's referring to how you behave through your day completely, whether it's...
Correct. It requires a balance of all of these different things. But it's unwise for us to think that we only need one of these things and not the other. You know, the same with work. It's important to have work, but it's important to have a framework at which we can then be honest at work as well. If we just assume that we will be able to figure it out by ourselves, that's what leads to credit crunches and fraudulent activity and scamming and all the rest of it. So it has to be consistent and it has to be balanced. All right, very good. We have a few minutes left. So I wanted to come to this article that I have from 1965. Do we want to do that?
Yeah. Well, the sermon.
The sermon that I was talking about weeks ago. I'm just interested. It's just interesting to see how people are back. I mean, some of you were listening to sermons in 1965, so you can tell me if this was the type of thing that people used to talk about. But it's interesting. His title is, it comes from a rabbi called Norman Lamb, who was a famous rabbi in America, in New York, and he was, I'm not sure if he was a founder, but he was one of the big players at Yeshiva University. And he talks about godless goodness, which ties in a lot to what we're talking about. Is it enough to just be a good person, or does it need God as well in the equation? Rita, I'm sorry, I'm just going to mute you again because I can hear myself looping back. Who else is looping back? I don't know. So let's have a little look at this. I addressed myself this morning to a problem that really requires much more than one sermon for adequate treatment, but which should be dealt with in at least one sermon. It is a theme about which the pulpit must not remain silent. Interesting, he always refers to his sermons as the pulpit, I've noticed. I've read a couple of his now, which is something that I've identified with, which is that when we speak, we're speaking as the representative of the pulpit, not just whatever I want to talk about that day. The problem is often expressed in the form of this question: can I not be good without religion? Is it not possible to be decent without accepting all the minutiae of religion? Is not a good heart sufficient without observance of all the ritual? I mean, everyone asks this question. That question has recently been answered in a sophisticated fashion by a number of theologians who have declared, borrowing a phrase from Nietzsche, the spiritual father of Nazism, that God is dead. This means that God has no relations with our world. He is unconcerned with man, and therefore he is irrelevant and meaningless. Hence, they conclude, we must construct a morality in human terms without reference to traditional religion. We must devise a secular ethic and propound a godless goodness. How should we respond? We who are believing and observing Jews, We who deny that heaven forbid God is dead, but who insist instead on affirming undying faith in the Torah's Elokim Chayim, the living God of the Bible. And then I think he has like 5 different ways of looking at this. First, he says, we cannot deny that there are good people who do not believe in God. That's a point that I think we would all make. We all know people who manage to be what we would consider to be good people, but they do not believe in God. We have all met such people in our own personal experience. However, Judaism maintains that such goodness cannot last forever. The moral, this is literally what we were talking about earlier. The moral instincts that prevail today are but the residue of a religious reservoir which is rapidly drying up. We are living off the ethical interest from the quickly dwindling religious capital of 2 generations ago. So if he's 1965, his 2 generations ago is the late 1800s. For ethical living is the branch of a tree of life of which the roots are religion. When you cut off the root, the branch does not wither immediately, but eventually it must die. So ethics is a natural consequence of religion. Reject religion, and within a few generations, ethical living and moral instincts must die as well. Is Claudia still on? Can you attest as to whether there is anything to back that up? Or do you disagree?
Hi, I'm here.
Hello.
I mean, I am listening to this sort of really enjoying this particular point. What specific issue?
I'm just wondering if that is something that is consistent within the ethical world as being true to fact.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. So for what I can see here, it's the idea that that religion has actually supplied the world with the ethical frameworks, and if you try and cut religion or cut God out of the equation, then it might last for some time, but eventually you get to a very diluted, distilled ethical framework from which to work with.
Oh, that's a bit harsh.
No?
No,
Okay.
that's a bit harsh. No, because there's all sorts of, wide-ranging ethical frameworks which lots of people work and live by.
But where are those rooted? He's saying that religion is the root of those ethical frameworks. Is that accurate? Our in-house resident ethicist.
No, I wouldn't say that they're always the root of them, but yet sometimes when you read them really carefully, you can see those principles lurking in them. And I've noticed some sort of stuff I've been doing. I've noticed that recently you read things and you go, actually, those are real religious theories, but then coated in more ethical theories. But sometimes you see those roots. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, thank you. So that's...
Not always.
Pardon me?
I think if
Not always.
Okay.
I'm beginning to see it increasingly.
I think it's true to say that were it not for the religious belief of Hashem, of somebody over and above us, we may not have reached a point where people understand the difference between good and bad. When the Jewish people received the Torah, throughout the world at that time, the wealthy, the strong ruled the poor, and there was no ethics. That was the right thing. Everybody expected it, and it was only through the development of the Hebraic laws that a concept of right and wrong, of equality and justice came about.
No, I don't know.
Now, whether it would have come about without that, I don't know. But I don't know. If you look at the Roman Empire, the Greek empires, the Turkish empires, they were horrendous, as was the American Empire right up till 1940, when they had slavery, when they treated black people the way they did. But
and England didn't, of course.
No, ethics has not started with religion. Ethics has always been around in some sort of form or another. I'm not saying that one's dominant over the other or whatever, but look
Machiavelli, look at Plato, look at Aristotle.
I was going to say, and then move on to Kant.
Which you can do with great ease now that you've started this philosophy course.
I love Kant.
He talks highly of you, by the way.
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. Although he did die many years ago, that would be a struggle.
They were all long after the advent of the Torah, and whether those who are fortunate enough to have believed Torah min Hashemayim or not, it was that development of the Torah which we believe came from God that started, to my mind, the total ethical approach to equality and justice. Even among the great Greek and Roman philosophers, there was an acceptance of a standard which would not be accepted today.
It wasn't rooted in religion.
No, I bow to your knowledge. I thought it was.
There's different perceptions, and they, if you think about the Roman Empire and Aristotle, it was they who had set the standards. Whether they were swayed by religion or not, who knows? And there is definitely reference, perhaps.
It was certainly influenced.
We should read it.
They must have been influenced by it. They used to throw men into a ring with lions.
It doesn't mean, well, no, not necessarily. It doesn't mean they're necessarily influenced by religion, no.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't until probably the 1700s, maybe later, that there were prominent voices who would entertain the idea of there not being a God or there not being a creator. Up until that point, wherever these ethicists are starting from, they're all starting from a position of there being a creator. Would that be accurate?
No.
No? Okay.
Wouldn't have thought so. I think they're looking, at that time they were looking for how can we live with something they can prove.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't see it, if they can't touch it. So what, from a moral perspective, from moral philosophy, what moral philosophy is there that can be good for everybody that they can see and prove? I think is probably where they were coming from. And the difficulties that they were having, and I think some of us are still having maybe, would be, for instance, the Red Sea. Killing all the Egyptians must be taken in a bigger, wider view. When Moses says we must kill everybody that is in the land that we're going, and I don't want to see anyone left. And there are so many points in the Bible which are quite difficult to ethically look at. And it's not a question of understanding or translation of the Hebrew. It is maybe an issue of, at that time it was okay, and now it's not, or we look at things in a different way.
Do we?
Well, if you think about it, Martin,
we kill more people than we've ever killed before.
Well, I think the flood did a pretty good job. I'm not sure you can compare flooding the entire world and killing it.
So those are the ethical quandaries that come up from, if we're taking the Torah as being the book of ethics, as it were, and then God goes and commands something which seems to go against the grain of ethics, then it raises big ethical quandaries.
Which people want to try to find answers for, which is great, because, as we've said, Judaism is about questions.
Absolutely.
It's not about blind faith.
Too right. So, turning now back into our things. That was his first point. Second, he says, secular ethics. Godless goodness is inadequate. It simply is not inwardly compelling. There comes a time when every man asks himself the ultimate question: why would I be honourable? All the rational answers provided by secular philosophy, that it makes for a smoother functioning society, that it has utility in promoting civilization, all irrelevant. Why should I be the one to risk my life for the lubrication of society's machine? Why honesty when it is not the best policy? Why should I suffer humiliation for my principles? Why should I act with courtesy and generosity when it is flung back in my face and my sacrifice goes unappreciated? There is only one answer, that there is a God who cares, who is concerned, who notices and observes, and is, as it were, worried for us. A corollary of this idea is teshuvah, repentance. If one is good in a godless manner, he may indeed stay on the straight and narrow path. But should he stray and deviate from the path of righteousness, he usually goes all the way in the wrong direction. There is nothing to impel him to return. When one's goodness, however, is found upon a religious commitment, then he too may stray from the right path, but he is, as it were, bound to the ways of righteousness by an elastic, and sooner or later, this rubber band of religion will pull him back to the direction of decency. That's his second point. So, he's, from what I'm taking from this, he's saying that unless you are accepting of an authority above you, there's no imperative, there's no boundary. There's a word that I'm trying to think of. There is no justification for behaving in a certain way, and at a certain point you just might be, well, this isn't doing anything for me, I'm just going to throw in the towel. I think that's where he's driving with this second point. Claudia, you've just turned your camera back on.
I have, haven't I? Yeah, I think I would need to read it again, actually. I would need to hear that again to comment.
Okay.
But don't worry. It's like, there does come a point where even if you subscribe to a particular ethical theory or a number of them, you can then turn around a few years later and just say, actually, I don't sort of get this anymore. And that's not uncommon either. But there was something that you said at the beginning that I thought, no, I don't automatically agree with that. Because there's many secular theories that, and someone else is into this as well, I can't remember who it was it Paul, that actually sustain society very adequately. I mean, yes, religion could be one, but I don't think it needs to be the only one.
Is there a risk of it decaying?
What's it?
The society that's not founded on a religious or godly basis.
Well, you would look at the Holocaust and say, well, there's your perfect example. And actually, I think probably many civilizations have decayed because they're not necessarily working on sort of a theological basis, but equally some have. Wasn't the Roman Empire built on a very strong religious basis, and they decayed?
It wasn't built in a day, that's all I can say.
So I hear.
But yes.
I mean,
but maybe that's his argument for, I guess, for it again. Okay, so that's no, because no, I'm not going to say that.
No, it's the other way, isn't it?
Yeah.
I get what he's saying, but I think that you can have a society built very adequately on non-religious ethical theories, which isn't what you want to hear, but I'm just putting it out there.
It's not what I want to hear either.
Whilst you were talking, I got on my paper.
The overarching abiding principle that I feel is that ultimately Hashem sets the absolute bar, and so even though it can take a lifetime to understand his messages, one could argue that and see, this is the difficult thing, because on the one hand his whole sermon over here is talking about how you need God, but on the other hand there's always going to be a point then at which you'd say, yes, but I really do mean the Jewish God, because as you said, if Roman society was built also on God, but it was built on their interpretation and their so
if I could just pop in a little bit, I think my understanding of society is this: human nature being what it is, unless you have a fear of God, even if you remotely believe, because we all say when things are terrible, people turn to a God even if they've never before. If there isn't that fear, then the only reason some people would keep the good laws is if they don't get caught, because it's to their benefit not to keep. But if you are fortunate enough to have a belief in a God, in your God, that you will have to answer to anyway at some time, it may keep some of us on the right path, not because we might not get caught by society, but we might get caught by Hashem.
But what if your belief in God is prompting you to do things which you feel are being asked of you by God, but which we would say are immoral, illegal, fundamental? I mean, that's where fundamentalism comes from, is that people will say, I'm acting in a way that God wants me to act. And Jews even do it, unfortunately, that they justify their sins, their averas, that it's what Hashem expects of them. So it's a dangerous line.
Are we saying that there can be no ethics outside of our Jewish religion? Because I find that a bit worrying.
I'm just reading a sermon, Peter. I'm not saying anything.
Is that what he's saying? Is that what he's saying?
Judaism believes in the Noahite laws for non-Jews, and the burden of Judaism, or the yoke of Judaism, for Jews, but not for the rest of the world.
I also
We
think
do
that
believe the Noahite laws are important for the rest of the world.
I haven't read that from his words so far, Peter. I can't remember the rest of it, but we should continue with this. The dilemma that we have is as follows: at 1:15, people are going to be signing on for Mincha, so we have a choice. We can either throw ourselves into a breakout room and Mincha will never know we're here, or we can pick up with this again next week.
Next week. Well, I'm getting a bit hangry. So.
Okay. No problem then. So we've gone through two of these things, and we'll try and pick this up again next week as well. In which case, let's say goodbye to all of the good folk watching on YouTube and Facebook. Have a wonderful and meaningful day, and we'll see you all again next week. Take care.